Karen thought destroying my retirement lawn was just harmless fun until she discovered what happens when you mess with an electrician who knows exactly how deep concrete foundations go. For 3 months straight, this entitled maniac used my corner lot as her personal shortcut. Every morning, that shiny blue Bugatti roared across my $2,000 Kentucky bluegrass like it was her racetrack. The screech of tires shredded my irrigation lines, the fumes from her exhaust poisoned my morning coffee, and the crunch under her tires sounded like my dreams being crushed one by one. I tried talking. She smirked and told me to take it up with the HOA. I tried putting up signs, she tore them down. I even called the police, but they said it was a civil matter. Civil matter. Like the mud tracks in my lawn didn't matter, like my property was just decoration for her shortcut. What she didn't know was that I'd just discovered something very interesting about where my property line actually ended, and where her daily route began. My name's Marcus Thompson. I'm 52, a union electrician who's spent 30 years building what most people take for granted, the invisible bones of America. I've worked under parking lots, hospitals, shopping malls, even airports. My specialty was always permanence, the kind of installations that stay where they're put, no matter what life throws at them. This corner lot in Millbrook Heights was supposed to be my reward, a quiet retirement home with my wife, Sarah. She's been fighting early-stage illness, the kind that makes every peaceful morning count double. But ever since that Bugatti started cutting through my grass, even our coffee time felt tense, like we were living on borrowed calm. One morning, I stood at the kitchen window watching her glide over my lawn again, phone in one hand, sunglasses catching the sunrise like she owned the world. I swear I could feel the rumble of that engine in my chest. Sarah just looked at me and said softly, "You always said you build things to last, Marcus. Maybe it's time to build something for yourself." That stuck. I spent the next few days studying old property maps, city documents, even pacing the yard with a measuring tape. Turns out, the edge she kept driving over wasn't public land at all. It was mine, legally and completely. Every inch of it. I could almost hear my old foreman's voice in my head, "If you want something to stand forever, pour the foundation yourself." So that night, I got to work. Quietly. No shouting, no warnings. Just concrete, sweat, and a line I was done letting anyone cross. When the sun came up the next morning, Karen's Bugatti came screaming down the same route, the same arrogance, the same routine, until a sudden metallic crunch broke the silence of Millbrook Heights. Sparks. Steam. The sound of shock. The sound of justice catching up. The Bugatti didn't move again that morning. And that, right there, was the moment the HOA nightmare truly began, because what followed wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning. The morning after the crash, the whole neighborhood felt different. You could smell burnt rubber and engine oil mixing with the damp scent of fresh-cut grass. Karen's Bugatti sat half-crushed on the corner, front bumper bent around a small concrete post I'd poured the night before. To me, it wasn't revenge, it was geometry. Her car had simply met the end of my property. By noon, the HOA board had already called me. Their tone was polite but cold, like a cop about to write a ticket he didn't want to give. "Mr. Thompson," they said, "we'll need you to attend a mandatory hearing regarding community damage and safety concerns." I almost laughed. Community damage? My lawn had been destroyed for months, and now suddenly they cared because her car got a scratch. That evening, I walked into the clubhouse with dirt still on my boots. The place smelled like air freshener and politics, that fake citrus scent people use to hide something sour underneath. About 20 neighbors sat in folding chairs, whispering and pretending not to look at me. At the front table sat the board, 5 people who acted like they ran a country instead of a cul-de-sac. And right in the middle, wearing a designer blouse and that same arrogant smirk, was Karen. The board president cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson," he said, adjusting his glasses, "we've received multiple complaints regarding the obstruction you placed on your corner property. It caused severe vehicular damage and..." I cut him off. "Calm. Firm. It's called a bollard. And it's on my land. The obstruction you're talking about was her disrespect. Karen leaned forward, voice dripping with honey and venom. You nearly killed me. That's attempted assault. You people saw what he did. He put a trap in the ground. I looked around the room. Some neighbors nodded with her. Others looked away, ashamed, maybe remembering how often they'd seen her speed through that shortcut. I didn't trap anyone, I said. I just protected what's mine. I asked politely, I filed complaints, I called the police. Nobody cared. The only thing that stopped her was the truth, the property line. For a moment, the room went quiet. You could hear the clock ticking, smell the tension, feel the line that divided us all. Then, from the back, an older man named Henry stood up. He'd lived there longer than anyone. I saw it happen, he said slowly. He warned her. We all heard him say it, week after week. She didn't listen. The board murmured among themselves. Karen's face tightened. Her perfect confidence cracked for just a second. The president sighed. We'll review the records, he said. Until then, both parties are instructed to maintain civility. I nodded, turned, and walked out without another word. The air outside was cool, heavy with the smell of rain. But as I reached my yard, I noticed something new. A few neighbors had come by quietly. A woman from across the street placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, about time someone stood up to her. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was something. A shift. A spark of unity I hadn't felt since the day I moved in. That night, sitting beside Sarah, I told her how the meeting went. She smiled faintly and said, You poured more than concrete, Marcus. You poured a message. And she was right. Because by the next morning, 3 more homeowners had filed complaints against Karen. The neighborhood was waking up, not to conflict, but to fairness. The war with the HOA wasn't over. But for the first time in months, I wasn't standing alone. By the next week, Millbrook Heights didn't feel like the same neighborhood anymore. The lawns still looked perfect, the mailboxes still shone, and the HOA still sent out their polished little newsletters, but something had changed underneath all that surface shine. People were starting to whisper. About Karen. About me. About how one man's lawn had become a line in the sand for everyone tired of being pushed around. The HOA thought they could quiet it down. They sent out a community reminder, bold letters, fake-friendly tone, warning residents against unauthorized structures and public disruptions. I knew that meant me. But that letter hit differently this time. It didn't scare anyone. It lit a fire. It started small. The woman across the street, Lisa, had her own story. The board fined her $100 for having her Halloween pumpkins out too long. The old man, Henry, got a violation for painting his porch light a shade too warm. And once people started sharing, the list kept growing. Petty rules. Selective enforcement. Power trips. Everyone had a scar to show. So one night, when the sun dipped behind the houses and porch lights flickered on, we met, right there in my driveway. Maybe 15 of us at first. Neighbors who used to nod politely now spoke like old friends. Someone brought lemonade, someone else had cookies, and I had a stack of HOA rule printouts that suddenly didn't seem so powerful. I stood beside my concrete bollard, still stained from the Bugatti's impact. It had become a quiet symbol, not of revenge, but of resistance. Look, I said, holding up one of the violation letters. They want us divided. Fined. Afraid to speak up. But we're the ones paying the dues that keep this place running. We are the neighborhood. Lisa nodded. They made me feel like I didn't belong, in my own home. Henry, who hardly ever spoke, added softly, they forgot this isn't a gated kingdom. It's a community. That hit everyone. There was silence for a second, the kind that hums before something real begins. So we started a petition. A fair one. Demanding accountability, transparency, and the right to be heard before being punished. I stayed up that night drafting it, printing copies, taping them under mailboxes. And by the next morning, the sound of pens scratching on paper was louder than the hum of Karen's engine ever was. The HOA board didn't like it one bit. They called it organized disruption. They accused us of undermining the harmony of Millbrook Heights. But harmony built on fear isn't peace, it's silence. And we were done being silent. Even Karen started to crack. She drove slower, looked down when she passed by. Her Bugatti, still missing its front end, sat crooked in her driveway like a wounded ego. She filed complaints, yelled at meetings, but no one jumped to her defense anymore. Her reign, that smug little grip she had over the neighborhood, was slipping. One afternoon, I came home to find a note taped to my door. It was handwritten, shaky, "Thank you. For standing up. For all of us." No signature. Didn't need one. That night, Sarah and I sat on the porch, watching the streetlights blink on. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You didn't just build a barrier, Marcus. You built a backbone." And she was right again. Because by the end of that week, more than half the neighborhood had signed the petition. The HOA couldn't ignore us anymore. A new meeting was called, emergency session, open to all residents. The board thought they were still in control. They didn't realize they were walking into their own reckoning. The night of the emergency meeting, Millbrook Heights didn't look like a quiet suburban community anymore. The clubhouse parking lot was packed, headlights cutting through the humid air, neighbors gathering in little circles, papers in their hands, voices low but firm. For once, everyone showed up not for the HOA's orders, but for their own say. I walked in with Sarah beside me, her scarf wrapped tight around her head. She was weaker these days, but she insisted on coming. "You started this," she said softly. "You deserve to see it through." Inside, the room buzzed like a live wire. The long folding table where the HOA board sat looked smaller than usual, surrounded by rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors. Karen was there too, sunglasses on indoors, arms crossed, pretending not to notice the stares. The board president tried to keep his composure. "Thank you all for attending," he began. "Tonight's meeting concerns the growing tension within our community." I stood before he could finish. My hands were steady. "Let's call it what it is," I said. "It's not tension. It's fairness. It's about people tired of being punished for living in their own homes." A ripple went through the crowd, quiet nods, murmurs of agreement. The president frowned. "Mr. Thompson, if you'd let us." "No," I said, voice calm but cutting through the room. "You've had your say for years. Now you listen." I held up the petition. It was thick with signatures, every page covered with names of people who'd had enough. These aren't troublemakers. They're homeowners. Families. Veterans. Teachers. People who shovel each other's driveways in winter and help fix fences after storms. You find them for flowers being too tall. For paint being too warm. For Halloween decorations being up 2 days too long. You find me because I stopped someone from destroying my yard. We're not asking for favors. We're asking for fairness. Karen suddenly stood, her voice sharp. "Fairness? You humiliated me. You could have killed me with that concrete." I turned to her. "I didn't humiliate you, Karen. You did that yourself, when you decided your convenience was worth more than someone else's peace. You called it a shortcut. I called it trespassing." She glared, but the crowd had shifted. This time, no one laughed with her. No one looked away. Lisa, the woman from across the street, stood next. "We all saw it, Karen. You ignored him. You ignored us. And the board ignored everything until a car hit concrete. Henry rose, slow and deliberate. This neighborhood forgot what it means to live together. Marcus just reminded us. The room went quiet. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the faint rustle of papers, the weight of truth settling on everyone's shoulders. Finally, the board president leaned forward, voice tired. We've heard enough. The petition will be reviewed. Effective immediately, all outstanding disputes are frozen pending investigation. Anne. Mr. Thompson's property is to remain untouched. Permanently. A hush, then soft claps. Then more. Within seconds, the whole room broke into applause. Some people even stood. Karen stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to shake the windows. I looked around that packed room, faces I'd barely known before this fight now smiling, nodding, standing together. It wasn't just about grass or fines anymore. It was about finally being seen, being heard. As the meeting ended, people came up one by one, shaking my hand, thanking Sarah, offering help with her treatments, with the house. That night, Millbrook Heights stopped being just a neighborhood. It became a community again. On the walk home, Sarah squeezed my hand. You didn't just fix a lawn, Marcus, she said. You fixed something bigger. I looked at our corner, at that little concrete post gleaming under the streetlight. A boundary, yes, but also a reminder, respect doesn't come from rules. It comes from standing firm when it matters. And for the first time in months, the air felt clean. Peaceful. Like home again. Weeks passed after the showdown, and Millbrook Heights felt different, lighter, almost human again. The HOA still sent out its newsletters, but now they sounded less like orders and more like conversations. Neighbors waved more. Kids played on the corner without parents worrying about someone yelling at them for being too loud. The air itself felt less tense, like the whole street had finally exhaled. Karen sold her house within a month. Word around town was that her husband left right after the Bugatti fiasco, tired of the constant drama. Her once perfect lawn grew patchy, her mailbox leaned, her kingdom quietly crumbled before she even packed her bags. When the moving truck finally drove off, not a single neighbor came out to wave goodbye. Just silence, the kind that comes when a storm finally passes. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't in watching someone fall, it was in watching everyone else rise. My mailbox started filling with thank you notes, small gestures that said more than speeches ever could. Someone left a basket of muffins. Someone else mowed my front strip without asking. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact now stopped to talk, to share stories, to laugh again. One evening, I was out front, fixing a small crack in the driveway when Henry came by. He leaned on his cane, smiling that quiet smile of his. You know, Marcus, he said, you didn't just pour concrete. You poured courage. I chuckled. I just wanted my grass back, Henry. He shook his head. You got more than that. You gave us our backbone back. That night, Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the sunset melt into gold. She rested her head on my shoulder, weaker now but peaceful. You did good, she whispered. You didn't fight for revenge. You fought for respect. Her voice trembled, but her smile didn't. And in that soft evening glow, I realized that maybe that's what this whole thing was about, not lawns, not fines, not even fairness. It was about dignity. The kind that can't be taken, only defended. A few months later, the HOA held new elections. For the first time in years, real people ran, not power-hungry neighbors, but teachers, parents, veterans, folks who actually cared. They even asked me to join. I said no, not because I didn't care, but because I wanted the next person to take the stand, to feel that same fire I once did. Now, when I walk past my lawn every morning, the concrete post still stands there, small, solid, ordinary to anyone else. But to me, it's a monument. A reminder that boundaries aren't walls, they're lessons. They tell the world, this far, and no further. Every so often, I see new families move in, kids riding bikes, parents unpacking boxes. I nod, lend a hand, and tell them the same thing I've come to believe deep down. Protect your peace. Speak your truth. And never let anyone drive over what you've built. The HOA still exists, but so does our unity. We learned that authority only works when it listens, that power means nothing without fairness. And as the sun sets over Millbrook Heights, warm light glowing on the lawns, laughter echoing down the street, I sip my coffee, smile, and think, this is what home is supposed to feel like. If someone tried to destroy your peace, would you stand up or stay silent? Drop a house with garden emoji below, and remember, sometimes the smallest stand can rebuild an entire community.